Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Media Monitor, the show that analyzes your news media both here at home and abroad. And we're coming to you on the SABC News Channel, independent and impartial. I'm Peter Ndoro, and this is what you can look forward to on the program today. We analyze the EFF leader Julius Malema's decision to ban Sunday Times journalists from attending and covering his party's events. And we ask, what might this mean for democracy, and if in fact these attacks on the media could be dangerous? We also take a look at media coverage on the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture, otherwise known as the Zondo Commission. Before we get into discussions around those stories in particular, let's take a look at the stories that are headlining your Sunday newspapers. The Sunday Times is leading with a story about how the top ANC leadership muzzled Jacob Zuma supporters, amongst them some of the President Cyril Ramaphosa's strident critics. And they did this by banning them from speaking at former President's critics. According to the publication, known Ramaphosa critics such as former Northwest Premier Supra Mahumapelo, Black First Land First leader Andile Mqitama, and others were barred from addressing Zuma supporters outside the KwaZulu-Natal High Court in Pietermaritzburg on Friday on the instructions of Luthuli House, apparently. The City Press is running a story of how new Communications Minister Stella Ndabeni-Abrahams is at war with the SABC board and has threatened to report the board to President Cyril Ramaphosa and Parliament. According to the publication, Ndabeni-Abrahams is battling the board over the retrenchments of 981 permanent staff and 1,200 freelancers at the public broadcaster, and also charges that board members refused to allow her to first negotiate a bailout with the Finance Minister Tito Mboweni before going ahead with the job cuts. The Sunday Independent is carrying a story about how former President Jacob Zuma called on black people to unite behind the governing party to ensure that it gets a two-thirds majority in the upcoming national elections. Elections which he described as make or break in deciding their fate. The Sunday Tribune has a story about how the University of KwaZulu-Natal would have spent 157 million rand from January last year to the end of this year investigating allegations that places at its medical school were being sold. The Weekend Argus is running with a story about how tourism revenue in the Western Cape has plunged by 1 billion rand. This is revealed in a report commissioned to measure the impact of the water shortage and stringent visa regulations. Crossing our border to Eswatini, the Sunday Observer there is carrying a story about a farm in the country, Eagle's Nest, which allegedly is intimidating workers from joining a union. The workers made startling allegations against the poultry company, among other things alleging victimization and intimidation of workers who wanted to join Swaziland Agricultural and Plantation Workers Union. And moving to West Africa, the front page of Nigeria's Daily Trust is leading with a story about the final results of the grain counters of Yauri in Kebbi State. Now, the town played host to people from parts of Nigeria and other countries when it perceived as weird that a group of youths are counting millet to ascertain how many there are in a 100-kilogram bag. Well, the announcement said that the number of millet in a 100-kilogram bag is just under 12 million. Can you imagine counting 12 million pieces of grain? Yeah, people have time. All right, so all of that so we might look at during the course of this discussion. But before we do that, let me introduce our discussants. And joining me in studio today, let me start with you, Tshamano Makhadi, who's a broadcast specialist, lecturer at the Tshamano University of Technology, and also chairperson of SANEF's Education and Training Subcommittee. Thanks very much for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Peter.
Next to you, Opa Ngwenya. Thanks very much for joining us. Freelance writer and columnist, former Secretary General of the Forum for Black Journalists.
Thanks for having me, Peter.
All right, okay, now, coming up, let's get into the story actually. EFF leader Julius Malema says that he will stop inviting the media to party events. This after Malema calls on his supporters to deal decisively with journalists whose names he's mentioned whilst addressing a crowd outside the Commission of Inquiry into state capture in Parktown, Johannesburg last week. Meanwhile, the South African National Editors Forum, SANEF, says that it's disappointed that the EFF declined to meet with it and that it would be too busy right up until next year's elections. Well, let's take a look at a snippet from an interview that EFF national spokesperson Buyiseni Ndlozi gave with the SABC this past week.
No single member of the EFF, in the name of the EFF, is going to beat up anyone, let alone journalists. So the EFF was very clear through the Commander-in-Chief, even on the day, that when we're saying these things, in fact, on that day, he didn't stop at political rhetoric. He explained what the political rhetoric and the words that he uses actually mean. And he, in categorical terms, said, I mean an intellectual shutdown of these people. But now I want us to think deeply about whether these people are journalists or not, in two ways. One, majority of them are no longer doing stories. They're no longer on the ground doing balanced stories. They are standing columnists who write opinion pieces. They've got special columns on the Sunday Times, and they write opinions, not stories. They campaign.
But surely they can do both.
They are not I'm saying they've not done that. They've not been journalists forever. They were journalists.
Let's take Ranjani Munisamy,
Yes.
for example. She spends every day at the Zondo Commission. She writes about what has happened. She obviously also writes columns, but she also writes factual pieces of what she's covering.
Majority of what goes, and that's why those things are in the opinion pieces. They are not in the news. Because even if she's organizing facts, she's organizing them and marshalling them for an opinion, for an argument, to persuade society to think in a specific way. That's what I do in my everyday life. I organize facts to persuade society to think in a specific way. And then who comes in their defense? The South African National Editors Forum. Those are the bosses. Those are the editors. Those are not the ground
Whom
journalists.
you have refused to meet with. I mean, surely...
No. I want to finish this point before the question of meeting them. They are the bosses. They are the people when a journalist comes and says, here is my story. They decide which part of the paper it will go, what frame it will take. They even decide the headline of both the paper and what goes to the street. So there's a whole lot of people that we spend everyday time with. Those journalists, for instance, that were there in Pretoria, those are the ground forces of journalism in this country. Nobody speaks for them. We have not refused to meet SANEF. We've met them before. We don't have time now. We'll meet them after elections.
So between now and then, the temperature stays high. There's no point of
we're
discussion.
too busy. We've got a lot on our plate. We'll meet the bosses of journalists after election.
All right, so that was Buyiseni Ndlozi, the national spokesperson of the EFF, saying that they're too busy to meet with SANEF. Well, let's start with you, Tshamano. Is that a concern? I mean, what is happening? How have temperatures got to this point where a political party says they just don't have time to talk to journalists?
No, I think it's very unfortunate. These are really real concerns, and I think the EFF should be looking at it not just as a matter that concerns a particular media house or a particular journalist, but it's about journalism as a profession, as you and I would know better. I mean, journalism, journalists themselves, they play a very important role in our society. We have a big election coming next year, so I just think that if indeed the EFF have concerns, there are processes that can be followed. The press council is one of them. If you really want to raise some of the concerns, you can do so. The broadcast commission, BCSA, those are some of the channels or platforms wherein you can raise your concerns. So this, I think it impedes on a number of things. Right at the center of it, we're talking about the press freedom, and that for us, it's
Okay.
a subject of major concern.
All right, bro, but I don't want to, because I'm a journalist, I don't want to sit here and pretend that we are without sin sometimes.
Yeah.
And so maybe let's try and force ourselves a little bit to sit in the EFF's shoes.
Sure.
Do you think that they might have a genuine case for being concerned about the way the media is dealing with it?
Well, I think it's worth doing an introspection, Peter. I think what the EFF is saying, which I don't want to talk for them, they have made a claim that the media in this country has stepped from the fence of impartiality to the contest of power in this country, and that they are asking or appealing for the media to stay on the fence of impartiality. But to ban any publication, I don't think it will serve their purpose in any way. My belief is that media will happen, news will happen, whether or not people are invited or not. The episodes that we're seeing should not really worry us in terms of democracy. We have had such adversarial episodes before. I mean, you'd remember in July 2012 when Jackson Mthembu called on people not to buy City Press. It was over the art by Mabulu. And in the 1970s, in this country, people were referred to as non-whites. And it took SASO to take the issue. And at the time, people would have said the media is under attack. But SASO had also written a letter to the media at the time. And the editor was Alistair Sparks, who's supposed to be the most enlightened editor at the time. And a reporter who was Tony Holland attended the SASO meeting, and he was expelled. And post the expulsion, it forced a meeting. Today, we celebrate the fact that black people are referred to as black people instead of non-whites. So there is an engagement that happens between the media and civil society actors. What we should look at is the motive behind it and whether the objective behind the objection is rational or not.
All right. So there's one thing, you know, when I was studying, the choice of words and the order of words can sometimes influence a story. So yesterday, Banyana lost on penalties. So notice I've said they lost on penalties. I didn't say Nigeria won on penalties. And I wonder if, as journalists, we're not guilty of that sometimes, because they're accusing the media of being part of a Ramaphosa defense force. That there was, for such a long time, this sort of anti-Zuma feeling and sentiment that almost translated to being pro-Cyril, as opposed to perhaps interpreting it as kind of reflecting the thoughts that people had on the ground. Could journalists be being caught up in a narrative, and when they write, they're not thinking about, they're feeding into it even more?
No, I think you're right. And, you know, just to agree with Opa, we need to do some kind of introspection. Yes, the choice of words are very important, and that plays a very important role in terms of how those facts are interpreted. So maybe one of the things that we need to continue to do as media is to continue with some of those trainings which I believe are very important, necessary. You've got to understand the issues on the ground. I might write a story thinking this is the narrative, but the interpretation, it might just be, you know, something different. So there's a need to continue with some of those trainings, help our people to understand, you know, some of the issues that people are battling with. So it's not going to be an easy process, but yes, people also have you know, different views, different approaches, and I'm talking about the different media houses. Yeah.
The point I'd like to add to this, Peter, is that our politics themselves are personality-based and loyalty-driven. So they do lend themselves to a situation where when you report about the personalities that represent this politics, you either find yourself either supporting the other or not, intended or unintended. It's the nature of the politics of the country. They are personality-based. So there is a need for politics to be shifted to policy and issue engagement. For now, it's policy, it's personality driven.
So let's take a look at this love-hate relationship that Julius Malema in particular has had with the media, because at times he's been loved and at other times he feels like he's been attacked. He tweeted that he was prepared to meet on condition that SANEF did not bring what he described as a racist white boy called Adrian Basson. And this is what Adrian Basson tweeted back. This is his message. It says, "There was a time when Julius Malema used to call me with tip-offs. My whiteness wasn't an issue, and Malema gave me stories about in common pursuit to expose corruption. This week Malema called me a racist thug." Okay, so there's a number of things here. The first one is, it seems as if the media is great when he needs it, and then when they turn on him, suddenly it's not good enough. You can't have it both ways.
Yeah, I think that was very unfortunate, very unfortunate indeed. I hold a view which says, don't be personal, It doesn't assist the situation, especially when you attack people in such a manner. Deal with the issues, right? But when you get more personal, even the issues that you want to raise, they get diluted, you see. So I think that in the first place should not have happened.
All right, I'm going to hurry us along because we're running out of time. But the other side of this, of course, is Adrian Basson has, I suppose, in his rage, because he was angry, has named a source. And I wonder if there's some ethical drama around that.
I think there is a conduct failure there, Peter. And it is based on someone losing judgment on a relationship that he believes has gone awry. My view is that journalists have no business loving any politician. Whether they are loved or not, they must just do their work. When they throw themselves in the loving arms of politicians, they must not cry blue matter when their love is gone. So they must just do their work, and that's the best protection journalists have.
All right, okay, we could chat about this for hours. Unfortunately, we don't have time, but we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, more. Stay with us.
The Global Citizen Festival, Mandela 100, is here for the very first time in Africa. The SABC is bringing you the concert live on the 2nd of December on SABC 1 Mzansi for Show. We honor and celebrate the legacy of former President Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, bringing you an exciting lineup of stirring performances like Beyonce, Jay-Z, Pharrell Williams, Usher, Shoma Josie, Casper Nyovest, Ed Sheeran, D'banj, Wizkid, and many more. If you want to be part of this amazing celebration, then tell us why you are a global citizen and send us a maximum of 3 deeds that you are doing to bring change to your community. Simply log on to sabc1.co.za and stand a chance to earn tickets to see your favorite stars. Stand up, raise your voice, take action. Together, we can be the generation. SABC, making good things happen.
Sienza kwenzeke.
Now, welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor. Now, with a few weeks left to conclude the Zondo Judicial Commission of Inquiry into State Capture that's investigating allegations of corruption and state capture leveled against the Gupta family and former President Jacob Zuma. The first hearings that started with former Deputy Minister Mcebisi Jonas, who testified about his meeting with Ajay Gupta at the Gupta compound in Saxonwold in Johannesburg. Fakey Mentor, in her testimony, told how in early 2010 the Guptas were already running things, as she put it. Former government spokesperson Themba Masego disclosed that former President Jacob Zuma had personally called him and told him to give the Guptas what they wanted. The Guptas were about to launch the New Age newspaper. Masego refused to help the family to get their hands on government advertising money and was later fired by the former president and replaced by Mzwanele Manyi. These were some of the explosive testimonies that made South Africans stay glued to their television sets and social media as shocking details emerged about how allegedly the controversial Gupta family were in control of state affairs. There has been widespread television and print media coverage of the commission, and in this segment we're going to take a look at the coverage of the proceedings of the state capture of inquiry. Gentlemen, okay, so this has been long awaited and it finally arrived. A lot of it we can see on TV. But do you think that we telling, as journalists, as the media, we're telling the story so that people can understand what these allegations are about and exactly what's being presented? Let me start with you, Broba.
I think the media is doing its best, Peter. In my assessment, I have no query to raise yet. The commission is sticking to the terms of reference, and the people who come before the commission can only represent what they believe is the truth that is under investigation. The commission itself may not be the champion of the truth unless it is expressed for them to do a report later. The issue that I was able to pick up was what the EFF said, but it also showed that Zondo himself is responsive to the issues, the location of the commission at Tiso Black Star premises. And the responsiveness of Zondo shows itself in the manner of explaining how they came about to use Tiso Black Star premises. The issue, though, may still remain from a perception point that the media itself has not been blameless in participating in enabling state capture in this country. And if we know that New Age and NN7 are obvious, they may not be what you call or careful or prudence on our part to believe that Tiso Black Star is exempted from enabling of the state. So from that basis, it may not be wise for the commission to continue at the Tiso Black Star. But for practical reasons, Judge Zondo has indicated that all efforts were engaged into to get an appropriate venue. They couldn't succeed. But lack of appropriate securing of a venue does not make it beyond dispute from a perception point.
It is interesting you say this because, look, you know, he's a Deputy Chief Justice. He can apply his mind, whether he's in my back garden, whether he is on the 10th floor of the SABC. Do you know what I mean? And so I was quite curious about the connections that were being made, and I thought actually it was more distraction, but that's my own opinion. Does it concern you that it was at Tiso Black Star's building?
Look, you would first of all look at the terms of reference. These are the key issues that for any commission established, you will always look at those things. But right at the back of your mind, you will also want to think of perception. Perception is very important, and you can't ignore it. So there were always going to be questions that were going to be asked around that particular location. So for the interest of everyone, I would say maybe it could have been done differently. It could have been done differently.
That's interesting. So what about the state capture inquiry itself? I mean, they sat for hours and hours and hours. And one of the things I was challenged with every single day is when I'm sitting at this desk now, what's my headline? Because they've said so many things during the course of the day. Do you think we were able to capture the essence in those headlines of what really went down? I mean, I look at some of these headlines. For example, the Citizen says, Manyi storms state capture inquiry without a lawyer. I don't know that that really tells the most important part of what Manyi said that day. Do you know what I mean? I mean, what are your thoughts?
It does miss a point, but perhaps it's someone who in their view of the commission, they've seen everybody else coming at the commission with support of legal advice. So the absence of an advice for Manyi was noteworthy and probably considered newsworthy. So whether there are hazards that absence of a lawyer poses for Manyi or not, it's something that we may have to look at.
Do you think people have a sense of the evidence that's been presented? If you look at the media in broad terms.
The evidence that is presented, I think what media should be trying to do is to sort of try and simplify it and help people understand the implications. I mean, I can give a number of examples, but let's just take one. I mean, we have seen a number of people who have sort of come and testify. That would include your nene and so forth. Some of the things that are said there, which in my view requires a lot of introspection to say we have gotten to this point as a country. Moving forward, how then do we prevent some of these things from happening? So those are some of the things which I think the media should also be concentrating on and sort of try and point out the wrongs that have happened. But I mean, yes, you will always get some of those dramatic, headlines, which doesn't necessarily. I know you want to say something,
but I'm cognizant of time. What I do want to ask you is, so we had two witnesses, and some people might say on opposite sides, Pravin Gordhan and Jimmy Manyi.
Yeah.
Did the media give fair, impartial coverage of both, or might there have been a little bit of bias towards one more than the other?
Well, from a perception point and experience, Jimmy Manyi is seen in the context of NN7 and the New Age, which was owned by the Guptas. So it's going to be a tough battle for Jimmy Manyi to be seen beyond that arena. Pravin Gordhan, who is a minister in the current administration, he has been seen as someone who has been resisting irregular, irrational decision-making around especially the nuclear deal. So community sympathies would likely be on his side. But in terms of how the media should conduct itself is to look at what each is saying rather than deal with the histories from which these two people are based. And what must not be lost, Peter, is that under question is whether public power is being exercised by people who are represented to do so, or whether power has been outsourced to private families and interests. That's the crux of the matter, where what's the point of electing people and these people simply part with power for private individuals who cannot even act ethically or be bound by the ethics, the oath of office of the people who elected.
Maybe just to add on that point, Peter, I think what is important is that forget about what has been said before. If you are to look at the story in a fair manner and sort of try and balance it, a lot of things has been said. We know that someone like Jimmy has been part of, let's say, ANN7. All of that history, but coming to the commission, if you are to tell a story, you don't have to be looking at that background. Deal with what is presented there. Yeah.
All right. Okay. We're going to take a break, but just very quickly, just before that, and this keeps coming up. People keep saying the media, the media, the media. How influential is the media still? Because for me, I'm finding that Twitter, Facebook actually are influencing the media and also people far more than mainstream newspapers nowadays. I don't know if that's your observation as well.
Well, the media has greater responsibility compared to Twitter because it has governing codes for it to operate professionally. Twitter, it's everyone's view and anyone saying whatever they wish to say. The media itself is governed by certain codes and it must abide by those codes.
That's albeit, but what I'm suggesting is these political parties are saying, I'm banning you and all of this, etc., etc. But actually, who's influencing the voter more? Is it us as media, or is it what's happening on social media? If I think about the My Way story, if I think about other, more recently, Momentum, that wasn't the media that caused momentum to reverse it. It was social media.
No, I mean, look, there's absolutely no doubt that social media, has a certain level of influence. But what I think is important is that media must stick to what they have to do, and I'm talking about the basics, right? Stick to the basics. Social media, yes, everyone is there and everyone has an opinion, but that doesn't remove us or shift things. I mean, in terms of how we're supposed to or expected to practice the craft.
All right, okay. I mean, again, another topic that we can talk about at great length, but we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll have more for you right here on Media Monitor. Stay with us.
This is a space for every woman in South Africa.
I want to speak to the women who cannot walk a kilometer in this country without looking over their shoulders, without being groped or harassed.
I was not born like this. In 2011, I got stabbed by a boyfriend.
How many centimeters? How many centimeters long is the political will to end the scourge of violence against women, against children?
I was locked up in the room for 2 weeks.
There are measures, there are laws, there are policies. But these policies and measures and laws do not speak to these lived realities.
We must fight the culture of gender-based violence.
This is where young men must be taught that women are not their footballs. This is where young men must be taught to respect women.
Welcome back. You're watching Media Monitor. Just before the break, we were talking about the effect of social media. Well, let's take a look now at some of the stories that have been trending on social media this past week.
It's been a busy week online with many issues being highlighted. The arrival of international music icons Beyonce and Jay-Z ahead of the Global Citizens Concert had South Africans in a hype. Let's look at the trending topics on social media.
The state capture inquiry got our undivided attention this week with intense testimony from people like Ramatlodi and Cheryl Carolus. Jimmy Manye's Mantashin left social media shaking its head as he couldn't decide which testimony he wanted to put forward. 16 days of activism makes a massive impact as many carried the hashtag Don't Look Away. Social media made it plain, though, that we need far more than 16 days to solve our gender violence issues. Malema has had a busy week as he laid charges against Pravin Gordhan and continues his tirade against the media. Banyana had the nation brimming with pride as they make it through to the finals. Steenhuisen's education continues to be a dominant story on social media, with the EFF's army taking shots at the politician. Pravin Gordhan himself takes a chunk of the media this week, and primarily due to that spat with Malema. SAA made a big impact as well, largely due to Cheryl Carolus' testimony at the state capture inquiry, but also due to the fact that they're getting yet another bailout. The tragic death of Lerato Kanye brought back our sadness for the death of both Lerato and WHP, and that put WHP back into the charts this week. Sentencing in the Parktown Boys story left many calling for a harsher sentence, as 23 years is not nearly enough for the atrocities experienced by the boys at the school.
Our website, sabcnews.com, had several readers interested in various news items. Two stories involving President Cyril Ramaphosa were popular on the website. One was about calls for the president to be impeached, and the other one was the new twist in the Bosasa Ramaphosa donation scandal. The article on WHP's son orphaned following his mother's passing brought traffic to our website. And the stories about Northern Cape women being the highest drinkers in South Africa and Dumi Mgokstad winning the SABC Crown Gospel Award Song of the Year received a lot of hits. That's a quick look at what people were saying and what were the highlights online this week. For SABC News in Johannesburg, I'm Lebo Changela.
Okay, so that's what's been happening on the digital space and on Twitter in particular. It was World AIDS Day yesterday, and I don't know. I'm just getting a sense and a feeling that we're not as tuned and aware and as into the messaging as we were in previous years. Have we become victims of some of the successes we've enjoyed in terms of managing the disease?
Look, I mean, if you look at it, there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. But I gather the sense that it has now almost become sort of a norm. No, we're used to it. Is the 1st of December, and the key messages are not preached. You know, so yesterday alone. There's nothing for me which sort of reminds me or reminded me of those, key messages. And I think somehow the focus has sort of shifted.
And we'll look at the papers just now, but it struck me that on the front pages of the newspapers, it's not there.
Well, I saw a piece online. I couldn't locate it in the print.
We'll talk about that piece later, but just it's not a big enough story to be on the front pages.
It's not a big enough
but
story.
It is a big disease in the world.
I think as you see the story of HIV, of AIDS, in terms of the event, it has now been taken as a commemoration that will take place every year on December 1. What that does to mindset is that there is nothing new, it's the usual. And the usual normally don't make it to the story, to the front pages. So something different, something repackaging needs to be put into how the message of HIV/AIDS is.
Whilst we're still on social media and digital, there's been a lot of conversations and spats and that's taking place with high-ranking officials. Mzwanele Manyi is one of them. He writes and responds to things that are happening in the media, and I just wonder what that means now, that the story makers themselves are able to influence the storytelling.
It's not everything that's worth your response, especially from a leadership's point of view. Some of these things, I'm sorry to say, but it's sort of, to a certain extent, really embarrassing. Especially when it comes from leaders. I just think that we are almost adopting, and I mean collectively as a country, adopting a culture which is not necessarily ours. Maybe social media has everything to do with it.
I think the media as a whole does grant the right to reply, but people have extended the right to reply to their social media spaces. And there they know they are unconstrained, they can say anything. But the danger of that is that you may be saying things that may be inappropriate, that you may regret later. Whereas in the media, at least it's mediated, they know the editing happens.
Well, it seems to be a thing that got Donald Trump elected. But let's take a look at the newspapers. You wanted to talk about something you saw online on the City Press connected to World AIDS Day.
I think what really got me worried, Peter, was that while we're celebrating World AIDS Day and we're celebrating the victories of turning the battle against the disease, we seem to be missing out on what may be crucial for this long life to be celebrated. I saw a story in the City Press online that's indicating that the companies that are dealing with ARV waste disposal are not being careful about it and probably irresponsible, because this thing is now leading to threat to water resources, tap water, underground water, and so on. As a result, the very people who will be saying we're happy are alive because of ARVs will be threatened by the water that is now contaminated. Even those who are not HIV affected, healthy, will be affected by the same water resource.
That is scary.
The University of Northwest has done that research, and it is, I think, in the process of tabling its findings. It's an issue for me, which I think the country must not lose sight of. It is so fundamental. It deals with our common survival.
I mean, this is hazardous waste, isn't it?
Yeah.
And if we termed it as that, we perhaps would treat it differently.
Yeah.
Because poisons and other things like this, we would be very careful.
Sure.
That's quite scary.
So what's the point of celebrating the battle against HIV/AIDS and then cause more greater hazard to the survivors and those who are not affected?
Okay. Tshamano, what story grabbed your attention?
The story that grabbed my attention is on page 12 of the City Press. Women will heal the country. This is now Oprah Winfrey speaking at an event organized by the Nelson Mandela Foundation and Graça Machel Trust on Thursday. There's a quote which sort of grabbed my attention. She says here, "Tell your story. There's power in your story, no matter how devastating. There's not one thing that did not happen to you. There's not one thing that did not happen to you that did not also happen for you." I thought it was really a message of hope, especially for the youth majority of South Africa, reminding us of the legacy of Madiba. And that legacy, it truly, and by all means, it speaks to all of us, particularly young people today, in days where there are many issues amongst them, unemployment. Young people are battling with issues of depression and so many things. So I just thought that message really, despite the fact that there's already a lot of work that Miss Winfrey herself is doing in South Africa, with the academy, as we already know. But I just think it's a message that again calls each one of us to lend a hand, truly, and do something. So I just think we need to also, to a certain extent, reflect as a nation and say, how best can we take the country forward? Because it's easy to talk about these things, but what do we do? We are all responsible. We are all accountable. My brother's well-being, it has to be my concern. So that's basically the message that I take out of that speech.
It was quite a powerful event in itself. I mean, we had the head of UN Women, former Deputy President Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, who said, and this ties into 16 days of activism, which we'll talk about now, where she said that if men just wake up one morning and say, I'm not going to hit a woman, then it's the problem solved. So it's almost, it's actually quite simple to solve. We as men must just stop.
That's true.
I think the other thing that's missing in this campaign, and us as a nation, is that hope is dwindling, and the event of Oprah Friday helps to bring hope again to the center. But it finds a nation that is divided into interest groups, men, women, journalists, and so on, and politicians. And the country is in an election mode. And the preoccupation is about retention or acquisition of power. So we're losing the sense of being human in all this. And the fundamental thing for me is that if we were to be human again, all these things will fall into place. The fact that we are not making an effort to be human again divides us into these various interest groups that there are winners and losers. And as we win and lose, the atrocities that are happening in society are simply eroding our common humanity. And the message of non-violence against women and children, perhaps even that language we need to look at, where we can promote the humanity and the dignity of women and children. So that if we change our thought process, does it account for your humanity, the things you do? Because even the animals cannot be found near doing some of the things that human beings are now currently accused or proven to have been done.
Yeah.
So are we being human? Really, can we still claim to be human in this day and age? Why is it that children cannot be trusted with strangers or any adult, which used to happen before? Why do we today have so extra means for ordinary children to take care of themselves and to stay away of strangers? Whereas before, when you saw someone on the road, you felt safe. Now you feel threatened because you feel safer alone than in the company of strangers.
And I'm concerned about what is playing out on Twitter now. I saw some tweets against Ranjani Munsami, and this is something I did wanted to raise a little bit earlier on when we were talking about these attacks on journalists. Julius Malema named some journalists and he says you must deal with them decisively. Now people interpret these words in any way that they want, and she was accosted at one point and there were some racist tweets that were said about her against Indian people in general this week as well. And I just wonder again, you know, our politicians, must they be careful about the things that they say and the danger that they can cause with some of the comments that they make?
No, words are very powerful. It's important to think of what you say, you know. Otherwise, some of these things, they divide people. I mean, we come from a history which is not so good. And the process of healing, the process of transforming, it's not even, if I were talking percentages, we're probably not even at 60%, you know. So there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. What we do, what we say, we must always be mindful of, you know, all of those things. No matter how difficult things are, no matter how angry we feel at times. But from a leadership's point of view, we always have to be careful. We always have to think about those things. But let me just quickly touch on the point which Opa, you know, spoke about when we're talking about women and children. One of the things that we're not doing, Peter, perhaps as men in trying to assist, you know, some of these campaigns, when I know that so and so is doing something wrong, I don't talk about it, and that's what.
And call out those people.
Call out those people.
Name and shame.
Say it like it is. Name and shame. And that's why, I mean, you can talk about what happens to, you know, that girl who is either raped or whatever the, you know, the things that might have happened. Sometimes they don't even report some of those things. But I would like to see somebody taking a step and say, I know such and such happened to you. I am going to confront this particular person. If it means reporting a case or open a case on your behalf, I will certainly do so. And that, for me, I think it speaks to you know, issue of accountability with all of us.
But there's a point you raised, Peter, which should not be lost with regard to Zimbabwe. How you personally felt so close to the issue to a point of being a champion of a cause, and you took it upon yourself to recuse yourself. Does it happen in our own country? Let's take Ranjani, for instance. Is it possible that where she feels she's closer to an issue, she can take the initiative and say, on this issue, I recuse myself because I'm too close to it? Because the closer you are to a point of championing a cause, your political contestants cannot treat you differently. They now see you as a contestant to the power area that they are in. So there's a responsibility issue that journalists themselves should
We're running out of time, but very quickly, SABC has been in the news quite a bit, and this retrenchment process, and now there's suggestions that the new minister is fighting with the board. Your thoughts on this, and very quickly, because we've got government as the shareholder, and government is saying that they're putting a moratorium on retrenchments, but then you've got a board that's been given custody of a business and they've been told to turn it around, and they've said we're overstaffed, and they're saying we have to retrench. How do you balance these forces?
I think there's a governance issue, Peter. The state owns this enterprise, the SABC, but the state has also gone to an extent of establishing a board to create a distance in terms of governance. So the state must trust that the board that it has put into place will do its fiduciary duties, the governance, and conduct the business of SABC in the best interest that it can. But if the main issue that crops up is the jobs of the people, then it's an emergency. It may be disrupting the traditional roles that both government and the board is playing. Therefore, it means they must provide themselves another opportunity to relook at this thing in an objective fashion and then resort to the traditional roles of how best the situation.
20 seconds.
Two things, Peter. There's the issue that speaks to constitutional mandate. On the one hand, you are dealing with the financial viability. So can the SABC continue with the current, say, circumstances and still be able to pay all the bills they need to pay and all of that? So look, I think it's really just one of those things where perhaps maybe more conversation still needs to take place. I mean, today you're talking about losses of jobs, and not only within the Janzim fraternity or within the SABC, but everyone is affected. But let's hope for the best going forward.
I'm sure we'll find a solution as we did in '94. All right, gentlemen, we're going to have to leave it there. Opangwena and Tshamano Makhadi, thank you very much for joining us. Your insights are powerful, and thank you for your contributions.
Thanks for that, Peter.
And you at home, thank you so much for watching our show, Media Monitor. Please join us again at the same time next week as we place more media issues on the table. From me and the team, have a great Sunday, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.